year. We've been good, but it won't last. Hurry Christmas, hurry fast. Wanna play that loose to loop? Me, I wanna hula hoop. We can hardly stand the wait, please Christmas, don't be late. Christmas time is here. Time for toys and time for cheer. We've been good, but it will last. Hurry Christmas, hurry fast. Wanna play that loops the loop? Me, I wanna hula hoop. We can hardly stand the wait, please Christmas, don't be late.
Some of those were just wrong. I'm sorry. But today we are starting to talk this week and next week about My Crazy Christmas. You know, because many of us are preparing to either go home for the holidays or families are going to come to us, whether you're in Branson or Norway or here in Austin, wherever you are. And we long to have time with family that is filled with warm feelings and joy and love and celebration, right? But some of us find a mixed bag of emotions waiting for us with family at Christmas. You know, sometimes as we get closer and closer to our family's house or they get closer to us, we feel smaller and smaller and smaller until we feel like we're an adult-sized person with child-sized feelings, right? You know, you think about it, you've heard that the goal of the spiritual life is to love God and love people. Jesus said that was the bullseye of the whole deal, right? And maybe we make great progress throughout the year. We're doing better loving our friends and our coworkers and even some of our crazy neighbors, right? And then Christmas comes. And why is it so difficult to really love our families? You know, why is it that we truly want to love our families? Sometimes we find ourselves lashing out at them. Or we find guilty, resentful feelings or angry feelings. Why is it we want to love our adult children or our siblings and so often we end up treating them in unloving ways? What is all that about? Well, it just might be that you haven't really learned to set loving boundaries with the people in your family. That might be part of it. And so today we're going to talk about how setting healthy boundaries with our family relationships actually helps us truly love from the heart. And that's the goal, to truly love from the heart, because it allows us to freely choose to love those in our families. Now, just FYI, this week we're talking about boundaries. Next week we're talking about how to bless your families, okay? So if you only attend this week and you don't attend next week, you're going to be really mad at me because you're going to have a really bad Christmas, all right? And I'm going to draw a boundary and say, that's your deal, okay? So you got to be here next week when we learn how to bless our families as well. Because that really is the point of all this, that we can better bless and love those around us. All right, so what are boundaries? Well, boundaries are property lines, kind of like this fence. You know, a fence tells me where my property ends and yours begins, what's mine and what's not mine to own, right? I'm responsible to mow my yard. I'm not responsible for my neighbor's yard. You know, my neighbor is not responsible to fertilize my yard, which is why it was really nice when my neighbor did. You know, because that's not his responsibility. I mean, I would have been really rude to say to him, my yard hadn't been fertilized in years. It's about time, you slacker. Right? That wouldn't be nice because it's not his responsibility. That's my yard. That's my responsibility. You know, we have boundaries, physical boundaries. We also have personal boundaries, even though you can't see them. Think about this. What if a stranger walks up to you and gets this close? Right? That's wrong, isn't it? Yeah, because they should know that you own 2 feet of space around your face. And they are not to trespass, right? I mean, what if we got really full in here and the ushers came up and said, excuse me, would you mind if someone sat on your lap? We're full. You're like, no, you cannot. That's my personal boundary. That's my personal space. Well, we have physical boundaries and personal boundaries, but we also have spiritual boundaries, and these are most important. They define us. They define what's me and what's you. What am I responsible for? What are you responsible for? And if we truly want to love God and love people, we've got to understand this. This is where so much confusion happens. You know, some mistakenly think, well, if I want to be a good Christ follower, then I have to always say yes to everyone and everything. You know, so someone says, would you fix my crisis? I'm a good Christian. Yes, of course. Can you pay for my mistake? Yes, of course, because I want to be a good Christian. Can you stay late again and for the next 365 days? Oh, yes, of course. Right? Can you watch my hyperactive Nanny 911 triplet boys while my husband and I move to California without them? Yes, of course. We feel like we're supposed to always say yes. But here's the thing. We need boundaries because people do not always follow God's will, and they will use and abuse and manipulate. It's a world where people don't always do what God wants. And so what we have to realize is a good boundary shows where we end and we begin, but it's not a fortress, all right? A good boundary is like a fence with a gate. In other words, it lets friends out, but it lets friends in, but it keeps people who might abuse or control us out. But the goal of all this is to really love the people around us better. That I would know where I end and you begin, what's mine to own, what's yours to own, so that I can freely choose to do kind, loving things without feeling resentful or manipulated or angry or bitter. All right, so what are appropriate boundaries? Well, this gets confusing for people who want to follow Christ. Because didn't Jesus say, well, if someone asks you to carry a load 1 mile, carry it 2. If someone asks you to give the coat, you give your shirt off your back. Didn't the Good Samaritan sacrifice personally to help the hurt man? Yes, all that is true. And this is what we have to understand, that we are to put others first and serve others, but that does not mean neglecting yourself or allowing others to run over you or abuse you. See, Jesus perfectly loved, but Jesus was not a pushover. And this is very important to understand. Jesus said, let your yes be yes and let your no be no. In other words, it's okay to say no, and knowing where to say no is really critical in life. See, Jesus taught and modeled the law of responsibility, that you have a life, I have a life, and we're each responsible for it. Nobody else is responsible for your life. God has given you the power to say yes and no, even to him. And so you have to steward that well. And as we grow up into adults, actually the only person we're responsible for with our choices is to God. And so when we don't realize this, things get kind of confusing. So I want to look at a passage in Galatians 6 that helps us sort it out. Galatians 6, 2-5 says this: carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. For each one should carry his own load. All right, so in this passage, we're given these two pictures. The first is the command to carry each other's burdens. Now, in the original Greek, that word burden is used to connote an excess burden. It's something bigger than we can really handle. So think about it like a trunk load of burden. A crisis, a tragedy. It's something that, quite honestly, this trunk is heavy. I can't carry it by myself. All right? And trunk loads of things come along in life. These are beyond our normal responsibilities. It's a trunkload crisis of sickness or disease or a lost job or maybe a lost relationship. And those things leave us in a state where we actually need others. And we as the body of Christ are to come and get on the other side of this and help bear one another's burdens. Because then we fulfill the law of Christ, which is what? To love God first and to love others, our neighbor, even as much as we do ourselves. And so we do get on the other side and we help each other through these trunkload crises. Now, but it also says, for each one should carry his own load. Now, there's no contradiction here because the word burden and the word load are two different words in the Greek language. And this word, carry your own load, it's more like a backpack worth of responsibility. It's doable. It's heavy, but it's not burdensome. It's not too much. I can handle carrying this backpack by myself. And what this is saying is that God has given each one of us a responsibility. In this backpack, I have my own responsibilities, my own thoughts, my own feelings, my own actions and attitudes. My responsibility as a husband and a father and a pastor here, and I have certain things that I'm supposed to do. And that's not your responsibility, that's mine. Now, where this gets confusing, see, is when people come up to you and say, look at this trunk load of emotion you gave me. It's your fault and your responsibility. See that? But this isn't a trunk. This is a backpack. These are my emotions, and I'm supposed to own them. But it gets confusing if you think this is your responsibility. And so differentiating what is actually a backpack worth of responsibility we're each to carry versus a trunk load where we're really to love each other and come alongside each other, that is the question of good boundaries. Jesus modeled this ability to set appropriate loving boundaries by saying both yes and no. Jesus said yes to people who needed to be fed or people who needed to be healed. He said yes to touching a leper, and giving compassion there. He said yes to forgiving a woman caught in adultery. He said yes to humbling himself to serve. He washed his disciples' feet, right? He laid his life down on the cross for you and me. But remember, it was not because he was manipulated or felt guilty or was in fear. He said, not my will, but your will be done, God. He did it out of love for God. And that's what's key, that when you set the right boundaries, you are free to do loving things for the sake of loving God first and people second. So he chose this. But he also said no along the way. If you study the life of Jesus, he wasn't a pushover. The religious leaders tried to trap him. One time they asked him this question. It was really a trap. It was a catch-22 question. And here's what he said, Matthew 21:24. Okay, I will also ask you one question, which was also a trap. If you answer me, I'll tell you by what authority I do these things. They wouldn't answer him. And so he said, no, I'm not going to be manipulated by you, and I'm not going to give you an answer. See, it's okay at times to say no when that was manipulation. Another time, the Pharisees came to him, this is recorded in Mark 8:11, to test him. Okay, that's key, to test him. They asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it. No. Now, why did he say this? Well, because they weren't really looking for a sign. He had done lots of signs, and there were lots of signs given in the prophets. They were trying to trick him and trap him and manipulate him. And he said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm drawing a boundary here. At times, Jesus said no to his good friends. Remember when James and John said, hey, Jesus, give us the two most powerful positions in your kingdom. He said, no, you don't know what you're asking for, right? Another time, he said no to promotion. It says in John 6:15 that people came to him intending to make him king. They wanted to promote him, make him king. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew. No. How many of us would have the boundaries to say, I'm sorry, Miss Supervisor, but I can't take that promotion with a raise because I know I have other responsibility as a father and a husband or a mother and a wife, and I wouldn't be able to fulfill that, and I know that's something God wants me to do. No. How many of us could draw boundaries like that? Jesus did. Sometimes he said no to really good needs. And this is where it gets really tricky. One time Jesus was healing people all day and all night for several days. And it says one morning before dawn, he got up and stole away so he could pray and just be with God, just clear his head. And they came and hunted him down. They found him. It says when they found him, they exclaimed, everyone is looking for you. We need you, Jesus. You know, Jesus, we emailed, we texted, we Facebook messaged, we even Snapchatted you, Jesus. Why aren't you answering? Right? We need you. People need to be healed, and they need this and they need that more and more and more. And you know what Jesus said? Look at this. It's very important. Mark 1, 37, 38. Jesus replied, no, let's go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come. This is very important to understand if we truly want to be loving people who aren't resentful, okay? Jesus said no sometimes to good things in order to say yes to better things, to the things God had purposed him uniquely to do, that others couldn't uniquely do. And you too have a purpose. You too have unique situations and settings, and at times you have to be able to say no even to good things in order to say yes to the things God has called you to do. Now, I'm not going to kid you. This is very difficult to sort out. I pray about those decisions all the time, and you need to as well. But the thing we have to understand is that, you know, trunk loads of crisis comes along, and we are to carry one another's burdens, but I can't carry all of your trunk loads of crisis, right? I mean, that's what kind of makes me laugh sometimes when people come up to me, and you know, the reason we're organized in life groups of 8 to 15 people is so that everyone is cared for and no one cares for too many, because you can't. We're finite people, we have boundaries. But in life groups, you know, how often I hear stories of a hospital visit of crisis comes on, the life group rallies around them. Cancer comes to the family, the life group rallies around them. You know, there's a loss of job and financial burden, and the life group rallies and cares for them. And then I find people who won't get or don't get connected in a life group, and they come to me with their crisis. They say, well, that's your job. And I sit there and I think, do the math. I mean, there's no way I could be that for thousands of people. That's why we're organized in life groups. That's why we have geography pastors as well. But God does want us to have those, you know, 10 to 15 people or so in our lives that start with our family, and then a few people around us in our church, our friends and neighbors, who when they have a trunkload of crisis, we can freely choose to love them by helping carry that burden. So we have to learn from Jesus in this. And it gets difficult when it comes to families, though, doesn't it? Because families taught us boundaries, or they violated our boundaries, and they may still be violating our boundaries. And that may be why Christmas gets so tough. You know, like when you call home and you can barely hear your mom on the phone, and you say, Mom, I can barely hear you, what's wrong? And she says, oh, well, you just rarely call. I just don't often have a chance to use my voice. Yeah, and you're like, okay. You know, and you get these little subtle, controlling, manipulative, little hint, little sprinkle of guilt here and there. And you know, in marriages, this is what causes in-law problems, right? You know, there's a big game hunter who was on safari with his wife and his mother-in-law. And they're deep in the jungle when one night the wife wakes up and sees that her mother is gone. And she wakes her husband up and says, Mom is gone, we got to go find her. And so the hunter picks up his rifle and they traipse through the jungle, and then they get to this terrifying sight. The mother-in-law is backed up against a thicket that's impenetrable, and there, crouched in front of her, is a big male lion. And the wife says to her husband, what are we going to do? And he says, nothing. The lion got himself into this mess, let him get himself out of it. All right, that might not be an example of good boundaries. I don't know. I have to think about it. But it's funny. But you know, when you finish visiting with a family member and you feel guilt-ridden or depressed or argumentative or self-critical or perfectionistic or maybe really angry and resentful, don't say, they make me so mad. Don't say that. Why? Because those feelings are yours. They're not a trunk load that they're responsible for. They're a backpack. Your feelings and emotions are yours to own. So no more saying, they make me so mad, or you make me so mad. No, say, I make me so mad because I don't have good boundaries. See? I make me so mad. That's mine to own. And a part of the reason we want good boundaries is so we don't get so bent out of shape, and instead we can act lovingly even when others aren't. So let's talk for a second about what are common boundary problems that people face. You know, Dr. Henry Cloud wrote a good book on boundaries that I would really suggest. It's a very important book, and we have a course that you can be a part of, a class that goes through it. But he notes two common problems with boundaries. One is when we can't say no. He calls these compliance. And then the other is when we can't hear no, and he calls these controllers. Now, not everyone falls into these two extremes, but we all lean one way or the other. So I want you to just do a little self-evaluation. And which way do you lean, and what are you going to do about it? So compliance can't say no. I remember my freshman year at the University of Texas, there was a young woman named Maureen, who was on my hall. And Maureen was the happiest, friendliest, most kind, loving person. I mean, she truly was. And she was very helpful. She was very servant-hearted. And she was really smart too. And so when Donald needed help with his homework, she helped him with his homework. And she ended up helping him again and again. And sometimes she even did Donald's homework for him. And others found out how helpful Maureen was with homework and asked her to help them. And before long, she was helping lots of people and even doing other people's homework for them. And her grades started to suffer. At the same time, people started to realize how giving and serving Maureen was, and they started to take advantage of her. Like I remember when my suite mate put this sob story on her and got her to clean his dorm because he said, look at all I have to do. Look at this trunk of responsibility. I need your help. And she took it, and she cleaned his dorm room because she couldn't say no. And then he even got her going down to the cafeteria line, and she would go through line twice and get his dorm food and put it on the table so he could just come right down and eat his food. I know, nobody should have to smell dorm food twice. It's wrong, absolutely. No, it is completely wrong. She could not say no. Now, actually, it got really sad because Maureen, second semester, dropped out of school. And I heard through the rumor mill that she'd become very depressed. She felt like she had lost herself, didn't know who she was anymore. Her grades were suffering while trying to help others because she didn't have good boundaries. Where do I end? Where do you begin? What's my responsibility and what's yours? Now, how do people get there? Well, when parents teach children that setting boundaries or saying no is bad, they're teaching them that others can do whatever they want to you. You don't want to teach your kids that. Children grow up defenseless in a world where there's much evil in the form of manipulation and control. This is probably what happened to Maureen. And so to feel safe in a world, we have to teach our children, it is okay for them to voice no, or I disagree, or stop, or that hurts, or it's wrong, or I don't want you to do that. We have to allow them and teach them how. You know, about age 2 or 3, this is when kids are learning boundaries, right? What's a child's favorite word at age 2 or 3? No, we all know that. They're learning boundaries, and that's okay. You want to work with them on that. We used to work with my daughter on this. You know, when she was 2 or 3, we'd play this game. What does a cow say, honey? Moo, good. What does a doggy say? Bow wow, excellent. And what does a girl say on a date? No. Yes, that's right, honey. So you just work with them, see? No, the truth is, children do need to be able to say no, or if they grow up on an extreme compliance side, they grow up feeling like when they say yes, they're loved, and when they say no, they're bad. They're not loved anymore. And that puts them in a very a place where they can be used and abused. So if you fall on the compliance side, how do you develop better boundaries? Well, first you find people who can encourage you and practice saying no and practice saying, I disagree. Practice saying, I would rather do this or I'd rather do that. You need help understanding, that if a person gets angry, you feel like that's your trunk load of responsibility, but it's not. Anger is their emotion to own. It's okay. They have to sort that out. You can be loving and still let other people own their own backpack of emotions and responsibilities. Now, I want to say, especially if you find yourself in an abusive relationship, and you're on the compliant side, you need to get help. Let us help you. Go on our Gateway Church website, go to Restore, type in counselor. Let us help you connect you with a counselor. We also have a class coming up at the first of the year and end of January, 1st of February, Boundaries class. So go to gatewaychurch.com /restore, sign up for that Boundaries class. Here's what I don't want to encourage you to do. I don't want to encourage you to, after one message, think you've got this down and go try to set boundaries this Christmas. It'll be a bad Christmas. I guarantee. Okay? I'm hoping this inspires you to go, that's me. I need to do something about it. And go become a part of this class, get others around you, and learn how to lovingly set boundaries. Okay? Now, you might fear that if you set boundaries, you'll be abandoned or not loved, but actually the opposite is true. People will start to respect you and love you more, and you will be able to love them out of a free heart that doesn't feel manipulated or controlled or resentful, because you can say yes and no. All right, what about controllers? This is a second boundary problem when people can't hear no. People can't hear no. Controllers don't respect the boundaries of others. Okay? Now, here's an interesting question. What happens when a peace-loving compliant meets an insensitive controller? They get married. That's right. That is what happens many times. And at first it works really well, right? But it's not love. And then the compliant starts to resent and starts to try to push back, and the controller gets angry, and maybe it even goes toward abuse, right? Eventually. Okay? If you go toward the controlling side, you have to understand a few things. You have to learn how to hear no and respect it. You have to let go of controlling others because you're not God. You have to humble yourself before God. Say, God, forgive me. It's not my will be done for everybody. It's your will be done for everybody. And when you start to let go and say, God, you help me control me, and I'll let you control others, right? And by the way, he gives us free will as well, so we've got to respect others in that way. Controllers often put their backpack of responsibility into other people's lap. I wouldn't have to get mad if you didn't. No, that's not a trunk that they're responsible for. That's your backpack. You got to own that. You got to learn to control yourself before God. Children who never hear the word no often grow up to be controllers. See, children need to learn to say no, but they also need to hear no from their parents to realize that no, you grow up in a world where other people have boundaries too. And you have to respect others' boundaries, and you have to respect authority as well. So parents, if you can never say no to your children, you're not helping them curb their own impulses and desires and respect other people's boundaries. So you got to help them say no, but you also have to help them respect no. All right, how can controllers respect no? Well, if you see these tendencies in yourself, first, you've got to learn another law. The law of reaping and sowing. Galatians 6:7 says, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. People reap what they sow. In other words, you sow corn, you're going to get corn. You sow wheat, you're going to get wheat. You sow manipulation and bullying and guilt and control, and you're going to get destroyed relationship. You're not going to get love. You're not going to get security. And you're going to be lonely. And this is what I want to encourage. If you find yourself on the controlling side, it's a lonely place to live. Because if you're honest with yourself, you know that people stick around not because they truly love you, but because they feel fearful or guilt-ridden or manipulated. And you don't want to live that way. So get help. You know, if you find yourself far on the side, get help. Let us help you connect to a counselor. Get in one of our 12-step recovery groups. You know, go after the anger issues, because here's the thing. Many times the reason you get that way is because someone did it to you. Now you're doing it to them, and you're going to pass it on unless you break the cycle. Break the cycle. God can help you break the cycle. All right? So family boundaries, yes, they are challenging. But the point is to freely love one another, to help us love our family members better, because we freely choose to bless them, to say good things, kind things to them. And that's what we're going to talk about next week, so don't miss it.